The shuttle docked with a low hum, and Elia Voss stepped onto the metal walkway of Vareth Prime for the first time. The air smelled like recycled coolant and something faintly sweet she could not name. Around her, dozens of alien cadets moved in groups, talking in languages her translator chip struggled to keep up with. They were tall. Most of them were very, very tall. Elia was not tall. She stood at 5 feet 6 inches, which was perfectly normal on Earth but almost comically small here. A Draelkin cadet walked past her, and his shadow covered her completely. He had 4 arms, bone plating along his jaw and forehead, and skin the color of wet stone. He did not look at her. None of them did. The Galactic Union Military Academy was the most respected training institution in known space. Every species in the Union sent their best and brightest here. For the first time in history, a human had been admitted. That human was Elia. She followed the directional markers on the floor toward the registration hall. The corridors were wide enough for species 3 times her size to walk comfortably. The ceilings were so high she felt like an insect in a cathedral. Holographic signs floated at their eye level, not hers. She had to crane her neck to read them. In the registration hall, a bored-looking official with 6 eyes and thin blue skin scanned her identification chip and handed her a room assignment without a word. Elia took it and walked to her quarters. The room was bare. A sleeping platform too large for her. A desk designed for someone with longer arms. A window that looked out onto the station's artificial sky, which glowed a permanent soft orange. She sat on the edge of the sleeping platform and let out a slow breath. She was here. That was the first step. Training began the next morning. 300 cadets gathered in the main hall, standing in neat rows organized by species. Elia stood alone at the end of the human row. She was the only one in it. Senior Instructor Thalak addressed them from a raised platform. He was Draelkin, like many of the senior staff. Old, scarred, with one arm that ended just below the elbow. His voice was deep and carried without effort across the hall. "You are here because your worlds believe you are exceptional," he said. "By the time this year is over, most of you will have learned that you are not. The Academy does not care about your bloodline, your politics, or your species. It cares about results." His gaze swept the room and paused briefly on Elia. She felt it like a cold hand on the back of her neck. Then he moved on. The first weeks were a blur of physical conditioning, tactical theory, weapons familiarization, and team exercises. Elia threw herself into all of it. She could not match the Draelkin cadets in raw strength. She could not match the Valinri in their psychic sensing abilities. She could not match the Torvathi in their natural armor and endurance. But she could run longer than most of them expected. She could think faster under pressure than many of them managed. And she never, ever complained. It was not enough to keep her invisible. Korvan Dihal noticed her on the 3rd day. He was the top-ranked cadet in the class, a Draelkin from one of the oldest warrior families in the Union. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 arms thick as tree trunks and bone plating that covered most of his upper body like natural armor. When he walked into a room, other cadets moved aside, not out of respect, out of instinct. He first spoke to her in the mess hall. Elia was eating alone, as she always did, when a shadow fell across her tray. She looked up. Korvan stood there with 3 of his friends behind him. He looked down at her the way someone might look at a stain on their boot. "So this is the human," he said. His voice was loud enough for the tables around them to hear. "I thought there had been a mistake in the enrollment records, but here you are." Elia said nothing. "Tell me, little creature," Korvan continued, leaning down so his face was closer to hers. She could see the individual plates of bone shifting under his skin. "Did your species send you here as a joke, or do they genuinely believe you belong among warriors?" "I am here to train," Elia said quietly, "same as you." Korvan laughed. It was not a kind laugh. His friends joined in. "Same as me," he repeated, shaking his head. "Your whole species has been in space for what, 200 years? My family has been producing warriors for 6,000. You are not the same as me. You are a charity case, a political gesture, and everyone here knows it." He straightened up and walked away. The cadets at the surrounding tables looked at Elia, then looked away. Nobody said anything. The incidents grew worse after that. Small things at first. Her equipment locker jammed before a training session, making her late. Her scores on a marksmanship test were mysteriously deleted from the system. Her name appeared on a duty roster for the worst assignments 3 days in a row. Then the small things became bigger things. During a formation run, Corvan's foot caught her ankle and sent her sprawling across the track. He did not look back. During a combat drill, a training weapon discharged near her head with a crack that left her ears ringing for an hour. Corvan was nearby. He smiled. Instructor Thalok saw these things. Elia was certain of it. He said nothing. A few cadets offered her small kindnesses. Sitha, a Valinri with silver skin and large dark eyes, sat beside her in tactical theory and shared her notes without being asked. Ren, a Torvathi who rarely spoke to anyone, once adjusted a piece of equipment for her that had been sabotaged, fixing it silently and walking away before she could thank him. But they could not protect her from Corvan. Nobody could. Not because they were unable, but because the academy had an unspoken rule that everyone understood. If you could not survive the pressure, you did not belong here. Weakness was not punished. It was simply allowed to destroy itself. On the 14th night, alone in her quarters, Elia opened a locked case she had brought from Earth. Inside were a pair of hand drapes, old and worn, stained with years of sweat and use. She held them for a long time, turning them over in her hands. She had not been chosen for this academy because someone felt generous. She had not been sent here as a symbol or a gesture. Earth's military council had reviewed 4,000 candidates and selected one. They had selected the girl who survived alone in the wreckage of a frontier colony for 5 weeks when she was 12 years old. The girl who walked out of the ruins carrying a younger child on her back and asked the rescue team what took them so long. Elia wrapped the hand drapes around her fists, slowly, carefully, the way she had done 10,000 times before. She was not here to make friends. She was not here to prove a point. She was here because humanity needed the galaxy to understand something, and words were not going to be enough. She tightened the wraps and began to train. 5 weeks into the semester, the other cadets had stopped wondering whether the human would quit. They had started placing bets on when. Elia heard the whispers. She was not deaf, and her translator chip picked up more than people realized. In the corridors, in the mess hall, in the training yards, they talked about her like she was a science experiment running on borrowed time. The Draelkin cadets gave her 6 more weeks. The Valinri were more generous and said she might last until midterm evaluations. The Torvathi did not bet. They simply watched. Corvan did not bet either. He had moved past amusement and into something colder. Elia's continued presence at the academy was no longer funny to him. It was an insult. Every morning she showed up for formation. Every time she completed a drill without collapsing. Every mark she earned in the classroom. It all chipped away at something inside him that he could not name. So he pushed harder. He began timing his cruelty for maximum visibility. During a squad obstacle course, he grabbed the back of her uniform and threw her sideways into a wall. The impact cracked something in her shoulder. She got up and finished the course. Corvan told the instructor she had slipped. The instructor noted it in the log as a fall. During a zero-gravity maneuvering exercise, someone cut the safety tether on her suit. She tumbled for 90 seconds before the automated systems caught her. Her heart rate never went above 110. The medical officer who checked her afterward said he had never seen a species maintain that level of calm during uncontrolled freefall. Elia told him she had experienced worse. Through all of it, she did not fight back. She did not report anything. She did not raise her voice. Sitha confronted her about it one evening in the study hall. The Valinri sat across from her, her large dark eyes filled with frustration. You know I can feel what you feel, Sitha said quietly. You are not afraid. You are not even angry. You are something else. Something I do not have a word for in my language. Patient, Ilya said. No, patience feels soft. What you feel is hard, like stone heated from the inside. Sitha leaned forward. Why do you not fight him? Ilya looked up from her tactical manual. Not yet, she said. When it matters. Sitha stared at her for a long moment, then shook her head and went back to her studies. In the classroom, Ilya was becoming harder to ignore. Her tactical scores were climbing steadily, and she had a way of seeing problems that none of the other cadets could match. Where the Draelkin approached warfare as a direct application of force, and the Valinri relied on information superiority, and the Torvathi built layered defensive strategies, Ilya did something different. She combined everything. She stole ideas from every species' doctrine and stitched them together into something new. The moment that changed how the instructors looked at her came during a wargame simulation in the 7th week. The scenario was called the Korathi Pocket, a famous historical battle that had been recreated as an academy training exercise. 212 classes of cadets had attempted it. None had won. The scenario was designed to be unwinnable. Its purpose was to teach cadets how to manage a fighting retreat and minimize losses. Ilya won it. She did not minimize losses. She did not retreat. She identified a flaw in the enemy fleet's communication relay structure that no one had noticed in over a century of attempts, built a false signal chain that tricked the enemy into repositioning their reserves, and then drove a strike force through the gap at a velocity the simulation's designers had never considered viable. Half her simulated fleet was destroyed in the process. But the enemy flagship was captured, and the battle was over in 11 minutes. The room was silent when the simulation ended. The holographic display showed the result in glowing text. Instructor Thalok stood at the back of the room with his arms folded. His expression was unreadable. He said nothing to Ilya. He simply ended the class early and walked out. That night Korvan found her. She was in the training hall alone, practicing hand-to-hand forms. The hall was empty at that hour, or it should have been. The doors opened and Korvan walked in, followed by 5 of his closest allies. They spread out in a loose semicircle behind him. I saw the simulation results, Korvan said. He was not shouting this time. His voice was low and controlled, which was worse. You think you are clever. You think solving a puzzle makes you a warrior. Ilya lowered her hands and faced him. Let me explain something to you, human, he continued, stepping closer. Cleverness means nothing here. In a real battle, there is no simulation to save you. There is only strength, and you have none. He shoved her, not casually like before. He put real force behind it. Ilya left the ground and skidded across the training floor on her back, stopping only when she hit the far wall. The impact drove the air from her lungs. Korvan's friends laughed. One of them made a sound that Ilya's translator chip rendered as the Draelkin equivalent of watching an animal stumble. Ilya lay there for a moment. Then she pushed herself up. Blood ran from her lower lip where she had bitten it on impact. Her ribs ached from the collision with the wall. She stood, wiped the blood with the back of her hand, and looked directly at Korvan. She did not speak. She did not move toward him. She simply stood there, bleeding and calm, and looked at him with an expression that had nothing in it that he recognized. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was not defiance. It was something older than all of those things. Something that lived in the deepest part of the human brain, in the place where millions of years of survival had written their instructions in a language that no translator chip could ever decode. Korvan hesitated, just for a heartbeat. He covered it quickly, turning away with a dismissive sound and leading his group out of the hall. But Ilya saw it, that one fraction of a second where certainty left his eyes. She held onto that moment. 3 days later, the Academy made an announcement that sent a current of excitement through the entire cadet body. The annual Crucible trials were approaching. the Academy's oldest and most celebrated tradition. Ranked combat bouts between cadets broadcast live across Union space. Careers were made in the crucible. Legends were born there. Cadets could volunteer and request specific opponents. Within an hour of the announcement, Corvan Dihal submitted his name and formally requested Ilya Voss as his opponent. The request was posted on the public board in the main hall. Cadets gathered around it, reading the matchup in silence. A Draelkin noble, top-ranked in the class, 8 feet tall with 4 arms and natural bone armor, against a human girl who weighed 130 pounds. It was not a challenge, it was an execution notice. An Academy official found Ilya in the library and informed her of the request. She had the right to decline. No one would blame her. The official's tone made it clear that declining was the expected and sensible response. Ilya closed her book and looked up at the official. "Good," she said. The official blinked. "You accept." "I accept." Word spread through the Academy in minutes. By evening, every cadet on Verath Prime knew that the human had agreed to fight Corvan Dihal in the Crucible. In her quarters that night, Ilya unwrapped her hand traps and examined them. They were fraying at the edges. She had owned them since she was 13, when a retired soldier on her colony had started teaching her to fight. Not the clean, formal combat taught in military schools. The ugly kind. The kind designed for a species that had no claws, no armor, no venom, and no psychic abilities. The kind that turned every disadvantage into a weapon and every weakness into a trap. She wrapped them again, tighter than before, and began to prepare for the fight that would change everything. The Crucible trials were 4 days away, and the Academy had become a different place. Corvan trained in the open. He used the main combat arena during peak hours when the most cadets would be watching. He fought sparring drones set to maximum difficulty and destroyed them with brutal efficiency. He moved through combat forms that showcased every advantage his species possessed: the reach of 4 arms, the crushing power of Draelkin bone and muscle, the terrifying speed of a body that weighed 500 pounds but could cross a room in 2 strides. He wanted everyone to see. He wanted Ilya to see. She did not watch. She trained alone in a small auxiliary room at the back of the physical conditioning wing. She had requested access to it through the administrative system, and it had been granted without comment. The room had no windows, no cameras, no audience. Sitha found her there on the 2nd day. The Velinri stood in the doorway, her silver skin catching the harsh overhead light, and watched Ilya move. What she saw confused her. Ilya was not practicing the standard Academy combat forms. She was not even practicing human military techniques as far as Sitha could tell. She was doing something else entirely. Her movements were fluid and controlled, almost like a dance, but underneath the smoothness there was something sharp and dangerous. Every motion flowed into the next without pause. Strikes became blocks. Blocks became redirections. Redirections became throws. It was a system built entirely around the idea that the person using it would always be smaller and weaker than the person they were fighting. "What is this?" Sitha asked. Ilya did not stop moving. "Survival," she said. "It does not look like any fighting style in the Academy database." "It is not in the database." Sitha watched for another minute, then spoke carefully. "I felt his mind yesterday. Corvan, he is not treating this as a match, Ilya. He wants to hurt you, badly, in front of everyone." "I know. He outweighs you by nearly 400 pounds. He has natural armor. He has 4 arms. The combat analysts are giving you a 0% chance of winning. Literally 0. Ilya stopped moving and looked at Sitha. There was sweat on her face and her breathing was steady and controlled. "Good," she said. "Then he will not be prepared for what happens." Sitha wanted to argue. She wanted to tell Ilya that courage was not a substitute for physics, but something in the human's eyes stopped her. It was the same look she had seen in the training hall after Corvan had thrown her across the floor. That ancient, unreadable thing. She left without another word. The day of the crucible arrived. The Academy's main arena was built to hold 10,000 spectators, and every seat was filled. Cadets, instructors, administrative staff, and visiting dignitaries from across the Union packed the stands. Above them, floating holographic displays broadcast the event to billions of viewers on hundreds of worlds. The Crucible trials were the most-watched military event in Union space, and this year's opening bout had drawn more attention than any match in recent memory. Everyone wanted to see what would happen to the human. The arena floor was a circle of polished composite material, 40 meters in diameter, ringed by energy barriers that would contain the fighters but allow the audience to see everything. Medical teams stood ready at 2 entry points. The rules were displayed on the main screen. Standard Academy combat rules. No weapons. No lethal force. The bout continued until one fighter surrendered, was rendered unable to continue, or the presiding instructor called a halt. Korvan entered first. He walked through the eastern gate with his 4 arms spread wide, and the arena erupted. Draelkin cadets stomped their feet in the traditional war rhythm. Other species applauded or called out in their own ways. Korvan stood in the center of the ring and let the noise wash over him. He was enormous under the arena lights. His bone plating gleamed. His eyes swept the crowd with the confidence of someone who had never lost. Then the western gate opened, and Ilya walked in. The noise died, not slowly. It simply stopped, as if someone had pressed a button. 300 cadets and 10,000 spectators looked at the small human woman walking across the arena floor and collectively held their breath. She wore standard Academy training gear. No armor, no modifications. Her hands were wrapped in old cloth that looked like it had been used 1,000 times. She was 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighed 130 pounds, and she walked toward the center of the ring as if she were walking into her own living room. She stopped 10 paces from Korvan. He looked down at her. She looked up at him. "Last chance, little creature," he said quietly so only she could hear. "Withdraw, walk away, you do not have to do this." Ilya said nothing. She settled into a stance he did not recognize, weight low, hands open, body angled. It did not look like any fighting position in the Academy curriculum. The signal sounded. Korvan moved first. He was fast, impossibly fast for his size. He closed the distance in a single explosive stride and swung his upper right arm in a hooking strike aimed at her head. The blow carried enough force to crack reinforced concrete. It connected. Ilya was lifted off her feet and thrown sideways. She hit the arena floor hard, rolled twice, and came to a stop near the energy barrier. The crowd gasped. Some looked away. A Valinri dignitary in the front row flinched. Korvan did not follow up. He stood in the center of the ring and waited. This was part of the performance. Let her feel the difference between them. Let the galaxy see it. Ilya pushed herself up. She wiped blood from the corner of her mouth. She walked back to the center of the ring. Korvan hit her again. A straight punch from his lower left arm that caught her in the ribs and sent her skidding backward. She went down on one knee. The sound her body made hitting the floor was audible throughout the silent arena. She got up. He hit her a 3rd time, a sweeping backhand that she partially deflected but still caught the side of her head. She stumbled, caught herself, and straightened. She got up. Something changed in the arena. The spectators were no longer watching a mismatch. They were watching something they did not understand. The human kept getting hit and she kept standing, not through luck, not through armor, through something else, something that had no equivalent in most of their species. Korvan hit her again, and again. Each time she went down, each time she rose, and each time she rose she was a little closer to him, a little more centered, a little more still. On the 7th exchange, Ilya smiled. It was small and bloody, and it froze Korvan in place for half a second. He had broken warriors who outweighed her 10 times over. He had made cadets surrender by reputation alone. And this small, bleeding human was smiling at him. He charged again, angry now, throwing a four-armed combination that should have ended any fight. But this time, Ilya did not take the hits. She moved, not backward, sideways, under, through. She slipped his upper arms by inches, redirected his lower left strike into empty air, and drove her wrapped fist into a gap between the bone plates on his lower ribs. Korvan grunted. It was the first sound of pain he had made in his entire academy career. The crowd went absolutely silent. Ilya did not stop. She was different now. The patient, absorbing fighter was gone. In her place was something precise and relentless. She had spent the first minutes of the fight learning him, memorizing his timing, mapping the gaps in his armor, cataloging which strikes he favored and which angles he left open. Now she used all of it. She struck the nerve cluster under his second left arm. She kicked the soft tissue behind his knee. She deflected a wild swing and used its momentum to drive her elbow into the thin plate covering his temple. Each hit was small. Each hit was precise. Each hit landed in a place that hurt. Korvan swung harder, faster, wilder. He was no longer performing. He was trying to end this. But Ilya was inside his reach now, too close for his long arms to generate full power, and she was hitting him in places he did not know were vulnerable. A spinning elbow, thrown with every pound of her body weight behind it, connected with the orbital plate above his right eye. The bone cracked, not shattered, cracked. A thin line appeared in the plate and dark blood seeped through. Korvan Dihal dropped to one knee. 10,000 spectators stared. Billions more watched through their screens. The top-ranked cadet in the academy, a warrior from one of the most decorated bloodlines in the Draelkin Empire, was kneeling in front of a human girl. The arena was so quiet that Ilya could hear her own heartbeat. Korvan looked up at her. His eyes were filled with something she had seen before, in different faces, on a burning colony when she was 12 years old. It was rage born from the realization that the world was not what he had believed it to be. He rose, but he did not rise like a cadet in a training bout. He rose like something ancient and terrible. His eyes went black. Every plate of bone on his body shifted and locked into a new configuration. His muscles swelled. A low, rumbling sound came from deep inside his chest. The Draelkin war state, a biological overdrive that tripled strength and eliminated pain. It was forbidden in academy bouts. It was barely controlled in actual warfare, and Korvan had just activated it in front of the entire galaxy. He charged at Ilya with killing force. And instead of running, she stepped forward to meet him. The first blow in the war state nearly killed her. Korvan's upper right fist came down like a hammer. Ilya moved, but not fast enough. It caught her shoulder and drove her into the arena floor so hard that the composite surface cracked beneath her. Pain exploded through her body. She felt something in her collarbone shift in a way it was not supposed to. She rolled. His second strike hit the floor where her head had been a heartbeat earlier. The impact left a dent 3 inches deep. In the stands, cadets were on their feet. Some were shouting. A group of Valinri diplomats were demanding the bout be stopped. Medical teams moved toward the arena edge but were held back by protocol. Only the presiding instructor could call a halt. The presiding instructor was Senior Instructor Thalok. He stood at the command podium overlooking the arena, his remaining 3 hands resting on the railing. His face showed nothing. His eyes followed the fight with the calm attention of someone watching a training exercise. His hand was 2 inches from the emergency halt switch. He did not touch it. Other instructors looked at him. A Valinri combat instructor spoke urgently, gesturing at the arena. Thalok did not respond. He watched. Later, when the investigation began, witnesses would disagree on why he hesitated. Some said he froze. Others said he was calculating whether Ilya could survive long enough to formally surrender. A few, including 2 of his fellow Draelkin instructors who testified under oath, said he simply wanted to see the human break. In the arena, Elia was fighting for her life. Korvan in the war state was a different creature. He was faster, stronger, and completely without restraint. The intelligence behind his attacks was gone, replaced by pure predatory instinct. He swung all four arms in overlapping patterns that left almost no safe space. His bone plating had locked into a hardened shell that covered his vital points. His black eyes tracked her with mechanical precision. Elia could not trade blows with him. One clean hit would end her. She knew this the way she knew gravity, as a fact that did not require thought. So she did what humans had always done when they faced something bigger and stronger and more dangerous than themselves. She adapted. The first 30 seconds were pure survival. She dodged, ducked, rolled, and retreated. Korvan's fists tore the air around her. One grazed her hip and spun her sideways. Another clipped her forearm, and she felt the bone flex dangerously close to its breaking point. She was accumulating damage. She could not keep this up. But she was also watching. Every attack he threw, she filed away. Not consciously. Deeper than that. In the part of the human brain that had evolved over millions of years to recognize patterns in chaos. The part that let a small, soft, clawless primate look at a predator and find the rhythm in its movements. By the 40th second, she had it. Korvan's war state made him stronger, but it also made him predictable. His attacks followed three primary sequences, rotating based on which arm had last struck. There was a gap, tiny, less than half a second between the end of one sequence and the beginning of the next. In that gap, his lower left side was exposed. Elia waited for the gap. It came. She drove her fist into the same nerve cluster she had struck earlier, below his second left arm. In the war state, Korvan could not feel pain, but the nerve cluster did not just transmit pain. It controlled the motor function of his lower left arm. The arm spasmed and dropped. Korvan roared. The sound shook the arena. He adjusted, fighting with three arms now, and came at her again. Harder, faster. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the human girl, bleeding from her scalp, favoring her left shoulder with bruises forming across half her body, did not fall. She moved through his attacks like water through rocks. She was not faster than him. She was not stronger. But she was reading him in real time, adjusting her movement with every exchange, learning his patterns faster than he could create new ones. This was what the galaxy did not understand about humans. They had read the files. They knew the statistics, death-world species, persistence predators, high pain tolerance, unusual endurance. But reading the words and seeing the reality were two very different things. Humans did not have claws. They did not have venom or armor or psychic abilities or any of the natural weapons that evolution had given to 100 other species across the galaxy. What they had instead was a brain that could learn under pressure, a body that could absorb punishment and keep functioning long past the point where most species shut down, and a will, something deeper than courage, deeper than stubbornness, that simply refused to stop. Korvan threw a devastating overhead strike with his upper right arm. Elia stepped inside the arc, too close for it to land with full force, and the blow glanced off her back. It still hurt. She felt a rib crack. She ignored it. She grabbed his upper right wrist with both hands, planted her foot against his hip, and twisted. The joint did not break cleanly. Draelkin bones were denser than human bones, but the ligaments connecting them were not. Something tore. Korvan's upper right arm went limp at the elbow. 2 arms down. He screamed, not in pain because the war state blocked it, but in rage, pure animal rage. He swung with his remaining upper arm, a wild haymaker that would have taken her head off if it connected. Elia dropped low, letting it pass over her, and drove her knee into the back of his right leg. Once, twice. The third time she felt the joint give, not break, but give, enough. Korvan stumbled. His right leg buckled for an instant. He caught himself, but his movement was compromised now. 2 working arms, 1 weakened leg, and a human who would not stop coming. He lunged at her with everything he had left. His remaining arms reached for her, trying to grab, to crush, to end this by any means. Elia sidestepped, but his hand caught the fabric of her training top and yanked her forward. For one terrible moment, they were face to face. His black eyes were inches from hers. She could feel the heat coming off his body, smell the chemical tang of the war state flooding his bloodstream. He squeezed. She felt the pressure on her ribs increase. Another crack, her vision blurred. She did not panic. She had been in worse places. She had been 12 years old, trapped under a collapsed ceiling beam in a burning colony, with the screams of her neighbors filling the air and no one coming to help. She had survived that. She could survive this. Elia drove her thumb into the soft tissue beneath his jaw, where no bone plate could protect him. She pressed a point that her instructor on the colony had taught her, a point that existed on nearly every bipedal species in the galaxy, where a cluster of blood vessels passed close to the surface. She pressed hard. Korvan's grip loosened. Not much, but enough. She twisted free, gasping, and put 3 steps of distance between them. He came at her again, slower now, damaged, but still coming, still dangerous. Elia set her feet. The arena lights were too bright. Her vision was narrowing at the edges. She could taste blood in her mouth. 3 cracked ribs, a damaged shoulder, more bruises than she could count. She had maybe 60 seconds of effective combat left before her body began shutting down. 60 seconds was enough. She met his charge head-on. She deflected his remaining upper arm with her forearm, feeling the impact shudder through her bones. She stepped inside his reach for the last time and delivered a sequence of strikes that she had been planning since the moment she accepted this fight. Nerve point under the jaw. Heel strike to the damaged knee. And then, with every remaining ounce of energy in her body, a rising hammer fist to the cracked orbital plate above his right eye. The bone shattered. Korvan's head snapped back. His black eyes went wide. For one frozen moment he stood there, swaying, all 8 feet of him with dark blood streaming down his face. Then he fell. He hit the arena floor like a collapsing building, and the impact shook the stands. He tried to rise. His arms pushed against the floor. His legs trembled. He lifted himself 6 inches, then 8, then his body failed him and he crashed down again. Elia stood over him. She was swaying too. Blood ran from cuts on her face and arms. Her left hand was swollen to twice its normal size. She could barely breathe through the pain in her ribs. She raised her right fist. The killing blow was there. She could see the spot, the thin bone at the base of his skull where the war state had shifted his plating forward, leaving a gap. One strike and it would be over. She held the fist there for 3 heartbeats. The arena was completely silent. 10,000 beings watched. Billions more held their breath across 100 worlds. Elia lowered her hand. She stepped back. The emergency halt signal sounded. Thalak had finally pressed the switch. Medical teams poured onto the arena floor. Cadets were standing on their seats. Several Valinri diplomats were openly weeping, though whether from horror or something else was unclear. Elia stood alone in the center of the ring. The medics went to Korvan first. She did not begrudge them this. She simply stood there, broken and bleeding and upright, and looked out at the galaxy that was watching her. She did not raise her arms in victory. She did not shout or celebrate. She just stood there, a small human woman in a torn uniform, and let them see what she was. Across 100 worlds, billions of beings looked at their screens and saw the same thing. And for many of them, more than anyone would have predicted, the feeling that settled in their chest was not admiration or excitement or pride. It was fear. The medical ward was quiet at 3 in the morning. The lights had been dimmed to a soft blue that was supposed to promote healing for most species. For humans, it just made the room feel like the bottom of an ocean. Elia lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling. Her ribs were wrapped in a regenerative mesh that hummed faintly against her skin. Her left hand was encased in a bone-knitting sleeve. The cuts on her face had been sealed with medical adhesive that itched terribly. The doctors had told her she would need a full week of rest before returning to any physical activity. She planned to be back in class in 3 days. Across the ward, separated by a partition, Corvan Dihal was still unconscious. His injuries were more severe. The shattered orbital plate required surgical reconstruction. His upper right arm would need extensive ligament repair. The knee damage was treatable but would take weeks of rehabilitation. The war state had burned through his body's reserves, and the medical staff had placed him in an induced healing coma to prevent his system from collapsing. He would recover. He would walk again, fight again, live a full life. Elia had made sure of that. Every strike she had thrown in the final exchange had been calculated not to kill, not to permanently cripple, but to end the fight. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. Holding back while fighting for her life required a kind of control that most species could not imagine. The investigation began the morning after the bout. A formal tribunal was convened within 24 hours. The charges were serious. Corvan Dihal was charged with activating a biological war state during a regulated academy bout, which was a violation of 7 separate articles of the Academy Combat Code. The evidence was undeniable. Every camera in the arena had captured the moment his eyes went black and his body began the transformation. His own biology had betrayed him. There was no defense. But Corvan's case was the smaller story. The larger story was Instructor Thalok. 17 witnesses, instructors, officials, and senior cadets testified that Thalok had full authority and clear opportunity to halt the bout the moment Corvan entered the war state. The emergency switch was within arm's reach. The rules required an immediate halt when any fighter employed a banned technique. Thalok had waited. The official timer showed he had delayed for 2 minutes and 41 seconds after the war state activation. In combat time, 2 minutes and 41 seconds was an eternity. When Thalok took the stand, he was calm and direct. He stated that he had been assessing the situation and determining the appropriate moment to intervene. When pressed on why the assessment took nearly 3 minutes, his answers became shorter and less convincing. The testimony that broke his defense came from a Valinri instructor who had been standing beside him at the command podium. She stated, clearly and without emotion, that she had urged Thalok to halt the bout within seconds of Corvan's transformation. She stated that he had looked at her and said 4 words in Draelkin that her translator Chip had rendered as, "Let the animal learn." The tribunal chamber went silent. Thalok did not deny saying it. He did not apologize. He simply sat with his 3 remaining hands folded in his lap and said nothing more. He was stripped of his rank, his teaching credentials, and his academy privileges. He was escorted off Vareth Prime the same day. As he walked to the shuttle bay, flanked by security officers, he passed a group of cadets in the corridor. They stepped aside. Not for him. They stepped aside because Elia Voss was standing among them, her arm in a sling, and they had arranged themselves around her without thinking about it. Thalok looked at her as he passed. She looked back. Neither of them spoke. Corvan woke 3 days later. He was informed of the tribunal's findings and the charges against him. He would face a formal disciplinary hearing that could result in expulsion. His family's representatives were already in transit from the Draelkin homeworld. He asked to speak with Elia. The request was unusual, and the medical staff hesitated. But Elia agreed. She walked into his section of the ward on the 4th morning, moving carefully because of her ribs, and sat in the chair beside his bed. Corvan looked diminished without his war state. His plating was dull. His broken arm lay in a suspension field. The shattered orbital plate had been replaced with a synthetic one that was slightly different in color from the rest of his bone structure. He would carry that mark for the rest of his life. He looked at her for a long time before speaking. "You could have killed me," he said. "Yes," Elia said. "Why did you stop?" "Because the point was never to kill you." He processed this. It took him a while. What was the point? Elia considered the question carefully. When I was 12 years old, she said, my colony was attacked. I was trapped in a building that was on fire. I could not get out. I was too small, too weak. I did not have the right tools or the right body for the situation. But I got out. And I carried a child with me who was even smaller than I was, not because I was strong. Because I decided that I was not going to die in that building, and once a human makes that decision, our bodies find a way to follow through. She paused. The point was for you to understand that. The point was for everyone to understand that. Corvan was quiet for several minutes. Then he said, I was wrong about your species. Yes, Elia said, you were. She left the ward without saying anything else. There was nothing else to say. The weeks that followed changed the academy in ways that would take years to fully understand. Elia returned to class on the third day after the fight, exactly as she had planned. She walked into the tactical theory classroom with her ribs still wrapped and her arms still in a sling and sat in her usual seat. Every head in the room turned to look at her. She opened her datapad and waited for the lesson to begin. The other cadets treated her differently now, not with the fear she had seen on the broadcast screens, something more complex. They had watched a human absorb punishment that should have been fatal, adapt to a threat in real time, dismantle one of the most powerful fighters in the academy, and then choose mercy when killing was easier. They did not know what to do with that information. Sitha sat beside her, as always, and said quietly, the Vilinri High Council has formally requested a human exchange program. They want to study your species' pattern recognition abilities. Ren, the Torvathi, approached her after class for the first time and spoke more words to her than he had spoken to anyone all semester. He told her that the Torvathi High Command was restructuring their tactical models. They had run the arena footage through their combat analysis systems 64 times. The systems could not explain how she had won. They are calling it an anomaly, Ren said. I told them it was not an anomaly. I told them it was a human. 3 days before the end of the semester, Elia was summoned to the office of the Academy Commandant. The Commandant was old even by Vilinri standards. Her silver skin had faded to near white, and her psychic presence filled the room like a low vibration. She sat behind a desk that was bare except for a single data crystal. Sit down, Cadet Voss, the Commandant said. Elia sat. I will be direct with you, the Commandant said. When the Union Council approved a human for admission to this academy, the expectation was that you would perform adequately, show resilience, demonstrate that your species could endure alongside ours. You were meant to lose gracefully and earn a respectable position in the lower rankings. You were meant to be a symbol. She paused. Instead, you broke the top-ranked cadet in the class. You solved a tactical scenario that has been unsolvable for over a century. You survived a war-state assault on live broadcast, and you showed mercy to an opponent who would not have shown it to you. She folded her long fingers together. You were not what we expected. No, Elia said. The question I must ask you is this. Was this your decision, or were you sent here with instructions? Elia thought about that. She thought about the military council back on Earth that had selected her. She thought about the retired soldier who had taught her to fight on a colony that no longer existed. She thought about the burning building and the child she had carried out and the look on the rescue team's faces when she asked them what took so long. I was sent here to show you what we are, Elia said, but what I showed you, that was mine. The Commandant studied her for a long time. Then she nodded once and dismissed her. Elia walked out of the office and into the wide corridor that ran along the academy's central spine. The artificial sky above was glowing its permanent soft orange. Cadets moved through the hall in groups, heading to classes, to training, to the mess hall. As she walked, they parted around her, not in fear, in recognition. A Draelkin cadet she did not know gave her a nod. A pair of Torvathi engineers stepped aside and dipped their heads. A young Vilinri, no older than Elia, stopped and simply stared at her with wide, dark eyes full of something that looked like wonder. Elia walked through them all. She was bruised. She was scarred. Her ribs still ached when she breathed too deeply. She was 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighed 130 pounds, and she was the most talked-about cadet in the history of the Galactic Union Military Academy. She was human, and for the first time the galaxy understood what that meant. Not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most advanced, but the species that walks into the fire and refuses to burn. The species that learns your patterns while you are breaking their bones. The species that stands back up every single time, not because they cannot feel the pain, but because they have decided that the pain does not matter. The instructor had stopped the fight too late, but the truth was simpler than that. It had been too late from the very beginning. From the moment a small human girl stepped off a shuttle on Vareth Prime and decided that she was not going to be broken. The galaxy had not been ready for that, but it did not matter whether they were ready. Humanity was here,